think you're good.
Think we're good?
Yeah.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Feel free to, can you squeeze in just a little bit further this direction? That way I don't have the swivel head going all night. And I think we have ample room. Could you get the door? We'll just keep that shut for now. And if anyone opens it, we're already about 5 minutes late. If anyone else comes in, everybody just kind of stop. We'll all stop and stare and make them feel terribly uncomfortable. I'm from Beloit originally. I'm from this area originally. And I live in Los Angeles now, where the concept of being on time means if you show up 45 minutes late to something, you're early. And I was worried when I came back here that I would have a hard time adjusting to being on time. And so it's been with great relief. I've seen things start 2 or 3 minutes late here and there. I feel a little bit more at ease and at home. So my name is Rob Gard. I am the author of Distilling Rob, Manly Lies and Whiskey Truths. It is a memoir and travelogue based upon my time living and working at a whiskey distillery on an island off the coast of Scotland. I was raised here. I moved to LA, had a very intense life there, and was kind of burned out on that, and left LA as a way to find my way back into myself. And so the book takes the whiskey maturation process and uses it as a metaphor for how boys mature into men. And it was with great delight that I was invited to speak here at the Sterling North Book Festival. And I reread Rascal a few days ago, which I hadn't read since I was a child. And Rascal is a great juvenile story, a brilliant juvenile story. Mine's a very, very adult story. But the themes within each, are very similar, I found. A sense of place where you come from, how that influences where you go in life. And then Sterling had his animal world to help frame his young mind in the face of personal tragedy, losing his mother, having siblings far away, one of them in danger in the First World War. I used the fictional world of Hollywood to distract me from my life growing up, and inspired my direction moving forward. I found it interesting in reading Rascal. It was written when Sterling was an adult, and the perspective and the voice of an 11-year-old boy was strong. And it's really, really fascinating how he could do that years later. And, of course, I looked back in Distilling Rob on my entire life, and how that perspective comes into being, how can you write about something 30, 40 years later and have it make sense and have it remain honest and real, is a mystery, and is a question in memoir. What is real memory versus perceived memory, and how accurate can you be looking back in life? And it's something that's not just that you encounter looking back in life, but it's something we encounter every single day and every single moment, that idea of memory and what we see and what we don't. I think most everyone was in here 5 minutes ago. I had somebody come up and bring me a bottle of water. Did anyone remember seeing that?
Yes.
Can anyone describe what that person looked like?
Long, tall hair, compact, attractive woman, slacks, extra sweater, and change seats frequently.
Observant guy. Anything else that somebody noticed about that person bringing the water up?
She was at your table a couple of times in the other room.
Okay. Anything noticed specifically in here? What was that scarf? What did that scarf look like? Anyone see the scarf that she was wearing?
No, I just saw autumn-like color. I didn't know what it was.
And orange, tiger stripe, autumn colors. All accurate, all different perspectives. And you could write a story on each that would diverge wildly, and you all saw the same thing at the same time. And that's kind of what memoir is about, is you have things that diverge really in that moment and then further over time. So as a writer, you need to get back to the honesty of the feeling of the moment. So that's something that I tried to do, and I think when you do that as a writer, as Sterling did, you create a bond between the reader, and I think that is something that I tried to achieve in Distilling Rob. And so with that in mind, I want to read a few passages from the book that talk about why I wrote it and the journey that I had along the way. So, with no further rambling, let's read the writing. Oh, first of all, before I dive in, anyone in here a whiskey drinker to begin with? That arm almost ended up on the moon. It shot up so fast. That's great. So I opened the book up with whiskey in general and what whiskey is about to lay the foundation for the analogy, for the metaphor that follows, the analogy that follows. Analogy, metaphor, and simile are so close, sometimes they just kind of clash into each other. So if I bounce back and forth between metaphor and analogy, know that I always mean analogy. All right, so whiskey isn't a manly drink. The monks who invented the spirit called it Whisky beta, the water of life. They could have called it that which makes the roof thatching go crooked when you've had too much. Instead, they associated it with the gift of life, with a woman's gift. Water is one of Scotch whiskey's 3 ingredients, the other 2 being grain and yeast. And it's a very feminine form of water at that. It comes from bubbling brooks, soft streams, and springs that cry from the ground. No raging sea are that preeminent male aquatic role model, Old Man River, here. This water descends from the heavens and caresses the earth as the Scottish countryside's carved angles unite rain droplets into small streams. The water perfumes itself as it flows through hills of heather, fields of amber grain, rosy bogs, and radiant wildflower meadows. Heather, amber, rose, and flower. The best nature-inspired names men can come up with are Rocky, Bull, and Ducky. Delicate flavors collected along the journey penetrate the water's DNA as it makes its way to a Scotch whiskey distillery to merge with barley taken from Mother Earth. Yeast is added to the barley-infused water, and the new liquid rapidly increases its alcohol content. When these 3 basic elements finish their time together, you're left with a new liquid that tastes of sugar and spice and all that is nice, the building blocks of whiskey. Everything about whiskey is feminine. There isn't a hint of maleness when the distilled spirit comes off the production line. How then has whiskey become embraced by men, as seen in centuries of battlefield flasks, smoking room crystal tumblers, strip club plastic cups, and sports bar shot glasses? The answer is found half a world away from Scotland's distilleries. In the forests of America and continental Europe, towering trees rise from saplings to become kings of the wild. Oaks stand sturdy and powerful, reaching tall from the earth, trying to kiss the sky. Eventually, the trees are felled, their wood is hewn, tempered by fire and shaped by force into a cask. The new form is rocked, rolled, and bounced. The cask stands empty and purposeless, waiting for fulfillment. Strong on the outside, vacant on the inside. All the images of toughness, all the substance of nothingness. Something happens to that vivacious whiskey when it meets the stoic timber of the empty cask, something wondrous. The feminine whiskey that went into the cask gives birth. The fizzy fruitiness of the pre-spirit liquid becomes refined and strong. It reaches into the solid oak and releases long-trapped gentle essences of vanilla and honey. kidding, we don't have to do that. The whiskey is transmogrified from being purely feminine to embracing the masculine, and the wooden cask has opened its tough core to return the elements needed to round out the whiskey. The wood and the whiskey unite. They give rise to an individual drink that, after years of maturing, ventures into the world strong and delicate, placed in a bottle to proudly display its own meaningful character. It's not feminine, it's not masculine. The whiskey is simply complete. How that transformation occurs can be discussed in terms of chemical processes, moonshine folklore, marketing catchphrases, and Robert Burns poetry. But this book isn't about whiskey. This book is about me, sitting alone on an island off the coast of Scotland, surrounded by 8 whiskey distilleries. Some guy in his late 30s, trapped between childhood and the unknown, wondering if I still have time to develop the character and strength I need to transform into a complete adult, a man. That sets the frame and the tone for what this book is about. It's been a fascinating journey for me, especially when I read the occasional comment on Amazon, occasional review, when somebody sees the word whiskey in it and they buy it thinking they're going to have a book about lessons of what whiskey is, and instead they get lessons of life. And those are actually some of my favorite comments and favorite reviews, because they say, oh, I wanted something about whiskey or something about traveling to Scotland, and I got this thing about this guy and his life and blah, 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 but I couldn't put it down. I kept having to read, and it was written well, and I just, so those are some of my favorite testimonials. So that sets the overall theme for the book. And from that spot, on a personal level, I needed to transport myself back in time as I looked back over my life and connected it to each phase of the whiskey making process that I worked while working at the distillery. It's interesting how memory comes together. There are things that we do in our daily lives which are automatic. You don't think about it. Reactions you have which are imprinted into your mind as a child or into your behavioral pattern. But some of those inciting incidents that spark those behaviors you don't think about. And it's an interesting process to have to sit down and look at what brought you on your life path. Again, when I went back to read Rascal, how often did Sterling North think about on a daily basis his pet skunks or his dog Wowzer? It was Wowzer, right? I believe?
Yeah.
Probably not every day, but the life that he lived, especially his passion for animals, carried forth throughout time based upon those young experiences. So I'm going to dash a few pages ahead into my perception of growing up here in the State Line area. And I didn't have a rosy perception of it when I was young. I was voted in high school the most likely to leave Beloit and never return. So I don't think it was a secret that I was looking for something else in life. So this opens up and frames the past part of my life. Like many people from Los Angeles, I'm not from Los Angeles. I was raised in Beloit, Wisconsin. Actually gets a good laugh in Los Angeles, because nobody is from there. I was raised in Beloit, Wisconsin, a working-class town where cracked streets were lined with average homes that did their best to smile through peeling paint and cluttered porches. The reek from the riverfront ironworks and cheese factories at the center of town permeated much of the city, giving the air a heavy and biting feel. And for those of you who, I know a few people here are from Beloit, and those who visited Beloit, early 70s, mid-70s, that was the town. That aroma, as it were, that's a gentle word for it, giving the air a heavy and biting feel. There were 3 bars for every church and 3 churches for every foreign car. Most folks drove vehicles made at the local GM or Chrysler plants. The cars often tinged with rust, and the drivers often tapped with beer. Dozens of green parks hosted impassioned Little League and soccer games when the weather was warm. They stood barren and uninviting during the long winter months, their skeletal trees serving as taunting reminders that the things that might make one happy in this town were fleeting. Many locals dreamed of an exciting life elsewhere, but instead spent their lives half-heartedly talking about the routine they surrendered to here. Little Robbie Gard, me, was yanked into this yawning town with a pair of forceps during a difficult delivery on a hot July day more than 30 years ago. I was named Robert Leslie after two grandfathers. My father's father, an 8th grade educated farm boy who grew up to become an unpredictable alcoholic, and my mom's father, a hyperkinetic amateur inventor with little emotional availability for his kids. At first glance, I was that cute little tow-headed boy whose hair elderly strangers liked to tousle, but their hands quickly retreated when they saw that my massive buck teeth chipmunking out over a receded jaw. Deathly pale skin, barely clinging to a skull that seemed to want to rip through, and eyes sunken so deep that one wondered if my eyeballs were even plugged into their sockets. People say the adult me looks vaguely like Russell Crowe. In my mind, I still looked like that undead child from every 1970s horror movie, except I could never whistle through those buck teeth, let alone hauntingly. I was shy, awkward, insecure, misunderstood, and far from angelic. When I was 6, I prayed to Satan on Christmas Eve to bring me a toy as a way to hedge my bets in case Santa didn't deliver. My 2nd grade teacher grew tired of me hiding in the large trash bin in the back of the room and paid me $1 a day to stop disrupting class. I raked in the cash until Mom started questioning how I always had money for new Star Wars toys and put a halt to that payola scheme. As a preteen, I broke into neighborhood homes, though only to rearrange furniture and move pictures. An interior design fetish, I suppose. And I'm so pleased, by the way, to have one of my partners in crime here with us today, sitting in back, also a closet furniture rearranger back in the day. Throughout my childhood, I would sit quietly with my parents watching TV night after night, forgetting where I was, who was in the room with me, and transporting myself into worlds where people were confident and didn't have to act out with crazy behaviors to have others notice them, as I did. Our family houses changed with move after move. My parents gave me one brother and then another, new schools, new faces, but the escape of TV and movies remained constant. Promises of a life far from Wisconsin. I love Beloit, and in the 90s I lived back in Beloit. I actually did return after college for a few years, and I was a newspaper editor over in Clinton, Wisconsin, and I loved that experience. But when you are sharing a story and looking back on memories of what shaped you, you need to transport yourself back to that place and time that sent you on this journey. And so it was challenging in some ways to write a description of this great town where a lot of friends still live, my family still live, and to write it in a kind of a bleak perspective. But the honesty that one needs for the piece and the themes that you're writing about drives you to that place. Again, I was reading an interview, or I guess a summary of one of Sterling North's sisters, was it Jessica, I believe, her impression of Rascal. She loved the book, but was not pleased at times with portrayals of the family, I believe. I keep looking over here. We're blessed to have Sterling's daughter with us right now, so it's fantastic. And you do run that risk when you write memoir of your memory of something running counter to somebody else's, and of your descriptions of that, if it's a negative description or a darker description, clashing in the present-day emotional interactions that you have. The best way to counter that is to write from an honest place. And this book does it throughout. I have been told, and that was my intention. One review said that I left blood on the page, so it's a very raw and open piece. And if any point along the way, by the way, people have questions, raise your hand, give a shout out. I'm kind of leaving this loose. I will continue to read through and progress a little bit on the way through here, but if people have questions about my story, about memoir or writing in general, I'm happy to answer that. Okay. Yeah, give me like a 10-minute shout out. So in case you want to do some questions.
Okay.
Yeah, but he's looking this way.
He's looking down, sorry.
Yes. Question.
So one I like. So whiskey's made throughout the world.
Mhm.
It's pretty mystical places, whether it's the deep dark forests in Bourbon County, the open prairies and rolling hills of Ireland, the great glens of northern Scotland, or Speyside.
Mhm.
Of all these different places you could have gone to do this, why Ireland?
I will tell you. Give me just a minute. Yes, that was actually my next passage to read, so you're good. We're in good shape. So I will lead in that in just a second. As a newspaper editor in Hollywood, we're jumping up into LA now, I had received invitations for everything from movie award shows to private art auctions, new club openings to VIP concerts. One day, an invitation to a whiskey expo in San Francisco passed my desk. I jumped at the chance to go. My first lesson in whiskey at that expo came at the hands of a representative of a Scotch distillery. He patiently walked me through the subtleties, and I was hooked. Something about whiskey touched me. It was an outsider. Elite people could effuse about wine in an exclusionary manner. Popular people in their designer jeans and little black dresses could flit about Hollywood parties with their various vodka concoctions and vacant conversations. Working folks had their beer, and then another, and another, while watching elite athletes on TV or reading about those Hollywood parties and people. Whiskey, on the other hand, was a mysterious drink. That kid in the class who always seems like he has a secret, but no one talks to him to find out what it is. Bogart drank whiskey when the clues in the case seemed just out of reach, and the woman he wanted even further away. Robert Johnson wrote blues late in the night with a bottle by his side. Writers in whiskey, well, the list is endless. Wine begs for conversation, vodka for parties, and beer for sports. Whiskey, well, whiskey asks you to stay home within yourself, to look at where you are and figure out how you ended up here. I'm going to reveal a little bit that we didn't touch on, but maybe encourage you to read the book. Following my recovery from that day slumped in slobs on the office floor, I thought about options for my escape from LA, and the one that kept flashing like a lighthouse beacon was the island of Isla. It's spelled Islay, so you might hear people call it Islay or Islay, but it's pronounced Isla. The island of Isla, off the coast of Scotland, alone with my thoughts like Bogart, a chance to reach into my heart and pull out whatever mess was in there, like Robert Johnson. 8 whiskey distilleries have made the island something of a mythical land in the minds of Scotch drinkers around the world. I've written about several of the distilleries through the years and grown especially attached to an icon in the industry, Jim McEwen. He is part of a team that resurrected the closed Bruichladdich distillery and made it into an international innovator. I talked to Jim about Isla at industry events and noticed there was a flickering twinkle in his voice when he described what it was like to live on the island. The notes I took in those interviews were all business, but the tone behind those words, spoken to me, was almost like a siren call. Jim was one of the first people I contacted with my impulsive idea to move to Isla, and without any prompting, he presented me with the chance to work at Bruichladdich. I accepted before the words were out of his mouth. So that is why Isla. And there was another factor behind it, and this is what also propelled some of my description earlier of Beloit. Beloit, when I was growing up, it was, the paper factory, Beloit, paper machine factory, Beloit Court. There were cheese factories. There was the Fairbanks Morse submarine engine making factory. smaller factories that fit pieces for the auto parts, the auto manufacturers in the area. A very, very working class town, and that was my family background as well. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. And it was a life that I ran from. You see all these things when you're a kid, all these great movie stars, all these great locales around the world. I'm out of here. I don't want to, get up at 5:30 every morning to get to my shift at 6. But by this point in my life, at the point of departure in the book, in my late 30s, when I had just having a rough time with who I was in LA, something about reconnecting with those roots was important to me. Did I miss some life lessons along the way? And so that's why I chose to move to Scotland and jumped on the opportunity to work at a distillery. Suppose I could have moved back here and worked. When I was in college for one summer, I worked at Ecolab assembling soap dishes. But I think, I'd rather drink the whiskey. So that was the working class experience that I chose to propel myself forward. I would like to say that my avoidance of blue-collar type activities was all just elitism and arrogance, but it was actually a deep amount of incompetence in my world, which I will dive into in this next passage that I will read from, because I have a history of really screwing mechanical things up. So I'm jumping ahead to my first day working at the distillery, and I am in the mash room where we take the grain and mix it with hot water to extract sugary water from it that eventually ferments and becomes the alcohol. This chapter is entitled, "Oh Lordy Boy." I am nervous, really, really nervous. My life's unexpected twists and turns have led me to interview movie stars with the dry as cotton mouth, party with rock stars, praying to God they wouldn't ask how a pasty, non-tattooed thing like me made it backstage, chat with billionaires, whom I feared were secretly cringing at my Midwestern accent, and even asking successful and beautiful women out on dates, albeit with a shaking voice and the very real possibility I would launch the contents of my churning stomach on them before I finished my date request. None of that compares to the nerves I feel right now. Clad in bright blue mechanic's overalls and wearing a yellow hard hat, I'm certain I look like a life-size Pez dispenser. My ill-fitting steel-toed boots thud ominously below me as I precariously grip the slippery metal railing on the slipperier metal stairs. The hard hat digs a crease into my forehead as it tries to cling to my increasingly sweaty head. My first day at the distillery starts where the heart of whiskey making begins. The mash house provides a perfect job for guys like me who took more pleasure in playing with my oatmeal as a kid than I did eating it. In mashing, you take massive amounts of barley and mix it with immense amounts of boiling water. Drain, store the liquid, and do it again, each time trying to extract more of the sugars needed for alcohol production. The cool part is watching and smelling the mashing process happening in front of you, which is what I get to do today. The mash tun is an immense open-air vat where the barley oatmeal is mixed with the aid of giant mechanical arms with menacing metal teeth. During each 45-minute wash, the steam opens up your pores in a way that would have real Beverly Hills housewives begging their husbands to pay big spa bucks. It also makes for these damn slippery stairs. The mash house is where the primordial ooze that becomes whiskey is slowly created. It's also the big bang to my genesis as a whiskey maker and return to my working class roots. Bruce Springsteen often sings of the working class man, bringing mournful melody to the lives of men who slowly give up living as they find themselves trapped in factory life. I think that would have been me had I stayed in Beloit. I would not have been one of those church-going, Little League coaching family men who are fulfilled by the working class family life. I would have been like my grandfather, locking myself away with a bottle in hand, sobering up enough to make it to my next shift, and then coming back home to booze. If that kind of working class man is considered a loser, then I would have been a massive failure. Fortunately, I failed at being a failure. Unfortunately, that is due in large part to my absolute ineptitude with manual labor tasks. And that is what has me completely nervous at the moment. I'm not merely bad at most manual labor jobs, I am horrible. My first and only day as a butcher's helper, I shredded 10 feet of sheep's intestine being filled with bratwurst meat, spraying ground pig innards into the furthest reaches of the butcher shop. My first and only time I drove a tow truck, I ripped the side mirror off as I pulled into the garage. My day's wages went to replace it. Frito-Lay, the multinational manufacturer of artificial nutrition, apparently rewrote their employee manual after I worked there for a summer in college on the packaging line. My job was simple: put small bags into big boxes. I lagged well behind my peers on the packaging team and spent 2 months on the Cheetos packing line, which was the slowest moving line and the one which you were supposed to master before moving on to Lay's potato chips or Fritos. My languid loading caused considerable problems, as the incoming midsummer extra hires had no place to train because I was stalled on the introductory line. Against my deep insistence that I wasn't ready to move up, I was shifted to the potato chip line, where the chips didn't have to go through the extra process of having chemical cheese caked on them as Cheetos did, which made the line move faster. Much, much faster. And now we're flashing back in time. I'm 18 years old, 4:30 in the morning, standing on a production line. My entire body shakes with fearful apprehension as the first bags of potato chips start rolling down the line toward me, twice as fast as Cheetos. I stand paralyzed as my potato chip Pamplona thunders ahead, relentlessly like a herd of bulls. Boxes fill up quickly as as quickly as my hands can transfer bags of chips into them. Still, the bags come. The pretty coworker I have a crush on, who previously hasn't acknowledged my existence, sees the looming danger I face and momentarily leaves her packing line to toss her extra boxes my way to save me time from constructing my own. Still, the bags come. I give a panicked glance to Laverne, the packaging line manager, who is an Isabella Sanford lookalike. She shakes her head like Mrs. Jefferson would do at one of George Jefferson's screw-ups and walks away. Still, the bags come. I picture Lucy Ricardo in a situation like this, where the candy assembly line overwhelms her. Lucy ate some of the candies to stave off the attack. I have no such option. Still, the bags come. My packing table is breached. The bags spill over and fall at my feet with a crinkly crash. More bags come. I am up to my ankles. More bags, shins. More bags, knees. Oh, lordy boy, you is sad, 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 Laverne says, as she finally stops the assembly line from sending more waves of Lays my way. You lucky this your last week, because I ain't seen nothing like this before. You one of those retard jobs. That stuck with me, boy. A friend told me the next summer that the employee manual mandated that new hires had 2 weeks to master Cheetos or they would be fired. Who says an individual can't have an impact on the operations of a giant corporation?
I'm writing a book that's becoming a memoir. It was originally about other people, but it makes sense, and the thread that weaves it together are essentially memoir things. So thinking about what it was to become a man is partly informed by the fact I'm a gay man, and yet I'm hearing a lot of resonances with what you described. First of all, that whiskey isn't necessarily a manly thing, and it's not necessarily about being out there and about sports, but about introspection. I'm also hearing you describe that a lot of the struggle, perhaps, that you were facing is all the things you were supposed to be, but you weren't mechanically adept, or it's probably not too easy to be a writer when you're growing up, or an artist or a musician, or all the other things that boys aren't supposed to be. So is that part of the struggle, is to not try to fit into some traditional model of what a boy is supposed to, or a man is supposed to become, versus other things? And is it liberating for us all now to think that we don't have to fit in those boxes anymore?
I don't know. I think in some ways it's the reverse issue that we have. When I was, my grandparents, great-grandparents grew up on farms, and so, you had a role, and you knew. Actually, there's a great section in Rascal where they go to take care of some tobacco leaves that I think have been hanging to dry, and the weather has shifted enough where everyone had to rush out in the middle of the night to remove tobacco leaves from the rafters, if I recall. And Sterling was 11 and had to go inside at one point because he got too tired, couldn't handle the weight of it. There was something in that process growing up where, once a kid hits 13, he has more responsibilities, whether it be on the farm, whether it be in the shoe shop where his father works. You have measures that define who you are as a man. You did at one point. And now we don't. We have the reverse. Turn on any TV commercial, and the man has the intellectual and emotional maturity of like a 12-year-old. And this is what 12-year-olds are seeing. So what processes, what steps exist to help us move forward? And you're right, I don't know. We don't know, and that's what a lot of this is.
Just a brief thought, I interviewed Ariel last week, talking about her dad. He was really against comic books in the 30s and 40s because they were very misogynist, about beating women and other things. It sounds like he was a very liberated man who had great respect for women. He was able to embrace all of that. So I don't know where this fits into the matrix of what you're describing, but it just seems like maybe it's amorphous what a man's supposed to be now, but I think it's better than have a rigid notion that restricts you. And for both boys and girls, it's better for us not to try to put people in boxes.
No, I definitely agree. It's just finding that balance between what are your options and what guides you. Certainly, if I were born, if any of us were born 150 years ago, you kind of know what your life is going to be. And even if you have what was it? We heard the discussion this morning. Was anybody here at the opening this morning? Well, just the humor and tragedy that on a fine line when you're working in a factory or a farm because of injury, potential injury. If you live, it's funny, and you can laugh at it. If you don't, you die. I would have been easily maimed at a young age if I worked on a farm or in a factory, and would have been the butt of many jokes until something finally did me in, because that's not where my talent lies. So, that is an interesting question or struggle, and a little bit different, especially for men. I mean, our biological shift that makes us, deepens our voice and gets us the scruff going, I can't speak for women, but I don't think has the same type of impact as, a woman's biological shift in adolescence, and how that defines how they feel about themselves as a woman or young woman versus an adolescent. For men, I don't think there is that big, as big of an aha moment. We're just a mess of hormones and confusion. Yes?
2 minutes to 1.
2 minutes to 1.
Yeah. Sorry.
All right. Any other? We have 2 more minutes. Any other questions?
I'd like to hear more about your life on that island.
It was pretty amazing. So I wanted to throw myself completely away from Los Angeles. So I moved to this island in January. So I'm moving to an island in the North Atlantic in the middle of January. It's on the same latitude as Siberia. So the sun, I don't know the sun. The gray skies get a little bit lighter at 10 in the morning, and they get dark again at 2:30 in the afternoon. There was no light, lots and lots and lots of rain, and I lived on this remote cottage in the north part of the island until I worked at the distillery, and it was just such a radical difference. I was 20 miles from the nearest village. I think 2,000 people live on the island in total. I would have to, there was bus service, but it was so limited, I'd have to time my excursions into town. There are a few chapters on those bus journeys. Gosh, I just imagine, I was only a quarter mile, half mile away from the bus stop, but when it's raining and the winds are 65 miles an hour, it's not fun. And I would quickly have to get my groceries bought in town and catch the return bus, because if I didn't, I'm stuck in town overnight, 20 plus miles away with no way to get back. I occasionally hitchhiked, but yeah, it was just a wonderful, fascinating experience away from my life. I realized it was time to go, and this, I'm not saying this in a bad way or a perverse way, but I lived on a sheep farm, essentially, that's where the cottage was. And one day I'm walking through the sheep fields, and I look at a sheep, and I did a double take. I'm like, wow, that sheep has really pretty eyes. And at that point, I said, okay, it's time to get off this island, you know. So thank you very much for coming in here. 6 months. So, yeah.
So you get to see the good and the bad.
Yes, definitely. Rain, and then Sunny and Mitch's attack.
Did it make a big change?
Yeah, definitely. I had intended to come back to the U.S. like a month later. Instead, I ended up traveling around the world for another year and a half or so, I think. A year plus. So, and we have a couple other, we have a 15-minute wiggle room between events, I think. So, just if there are any other burning questions, I'm happy to answer. Or I'm going to go next door and I'll be signing my book and selling my book. So you're welcome to come over for that.
As far as the metaphor and the maturation process, where do you find yourself now? Are you done?
I don't know, and I hope maybe some other people can answer this, but I don't know if you're ever really done. I think there are things that where you feel like I'm here and I'm this secure, confident adult. I have everything under control, and then there are times you just get confused and like, what should I do here? So I don't know if you're ever done, but I think what you do is you gain enough confidence and trust in yourself to move forward and know that you will find your right direction. And that's really what this is about. So thank you. No, I go back and forth a little bit. I'm hoping I will be now because I just quit my job last week to write my next book. So
Back and forth between.
I am a communications person, so I work doing public affairs and political communications in Los Angeles.
Mostly.
Pardon?
Which is writing mostly.
It is. It's a not nearly as enjoyable kind of writing. It's writing speeches for politicians and writing press releases, and I much more enjoy this. So I'm taking a few months off to immerse myself in my next book.
Which is about?
It's about whiskey, but it's a fiction piece, and so there's a supernatural twist to it.
I think that shit looks better.
Much. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming.